This is the Hart RE2 fly reel, and it's one of the weirdest fly reels ever made. And today, I'm here to review it. If you've never heard of Hart, that's probably because you're not a fan of vintage fly reels. Because if you are a fly reel enthusiast, this is one of the most interesting makers of the late vintage era. But if you are a fan of vintage fly reels, you'll be happy to know that this RE2 is actually for sale on tridentflyfishing.com as part of our vintage tackle program. And if you have vintage tackle that's sitting around that you're interested in trading in, we have options for cash now, consignment, and we pay the best prices of anyone in the industry. But now let's get back to this Hart reel. Hart was a fly reel designer that primarily made reels in the 80s and 90s. His designs were a radical departure from the traditional Hardy designs. So you have these classic click pawls and some disc drags from Hardy, and Hardy was pretty much making reels for everyone at that point in time. Then comes Hart, who was based in the Netherlands and frankly made some really, really crazy changes. These reels are almost works of art. In fact, Hart is the only fly reel maker that is part of the permanent exhibition at MoMA. But with that focus on design, there are definitely some drawbacks. And as you'll see, this design is very mid-century or Art Deco. Even today, these reels look fantastic. Before I dive into the specifics of this reel, there are some interesting things about the RE lineup. First off, this particular reel was actually marketed by the Dutch Reel Company. So Hart had his own company for a while, then he started making reels for other people and eventually sold it and then got back into the reel business. There's a lot of stories that are going on there during the 80s and 90s, but this one is a Dutch reel company made in the Netherlands, though it says Holland on the spool because that's what it was back then. And this reel actually comes with the original leather case. And while some of the Hart reels that were made by his company have an Hart logo, this is a Dutch Reel Company reel, and so you've got the Dutch Reel Company logo here. And while it's the Remco that's on display at MoMA, this is definitely an homage to that reel, and you'll see that this reel shares a lot of features with that Remco. And now let's dive into this reel by talking about the drag. And yes, it has a drag, which is a departure from those old Hardy Perfects. This RE2 is sort of a 6 or 7 weight reel. While you can put an 8 weight on there, it's definitely not designed for saltwater use, and I would not recommend it. But as a 7 weight, it does have a bit of drag. And in fact, this is a single turn drag. So we're talking about a reel from the 80s or 90s that has a single turn drag that is all the rage today. That's pretty cool. This being a freshwater reel, it doesn't have a ton of drag strength. So if you were looking to fish big game with this reel, it's not gonna have a ton of stopping power. I'd peg it at most a couple of pounds, 2 or 3. And as I said, it's not really designed for saltwater use. And while I couldn't find any information about whether or not it's sealed, I would say it's pretty safe to assume that it's not. And even if it was at one time, those seals have probably degraded, so this one is probably not sealed. Up next is the Spool, and as you can see, this is a traditional arbor reel, though I will say it is slightly larger than the absolute smallest true traditional arbors. So it's like the high end of a traditional arbor is kind of where I would peg it. We've got a max diameter of 2.8 inches, a width of 0.8 inches, and an arbor size of 0.95 inches. And that 0.95 is going to compare to, say, a modern Orvis batten kill, which is at 0.7. So you do get somewhat better pickup, but overall, it's still not going to be a fast reel. It's going to pick up line at roughly 4.5 inches per turn, or 267 turns for your 100-foot fly line. That's a lot. You're going to be spending a lot of time reeling with this reel. But that might be a good thing, because if you're buying a classic reel, you want it to be used. In terms of capacities, like I said, this reel was designed for a 7 weight. We measured it out at about 100 yards of backing with an 8 weight, or about 150 yards with a 5-weight. And your mileage may vary there a little bit depending on which line you choose. This review is brought to you by Trident Travel, which is our new destination travel service where you'll get our expert advice, planning, and guidance at no additional cost. That means no credit card fees, no booking fees, and for a limited time, you'll even earn Trident rewards on your travel bookings. So with every trip you book, you'll be earning valuable points that you can use towards free tackle here at Trident. Recently, we've had some clients go on some absolutely fantastic trips like tarpon fishing in Belize, Atlantic salmon fishing in New Brunswick, and trout fishing in Alaska. So if you're thinking about taking a fly fishing trip, Trident Travel is the way to do it. We've got a ton of great destinations, excellent service, and even more destinations being added every month. Check us out at tridentflyfishing.com/travel. Up next is weight, and this RET Hart reel comes in at 5.5 ounces, which is actually really light for a 7-weight, 8-weight reel that was made back in the 80s or 90s. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say it was fantastically light for a reel back then. Even by today's standards, if you were to consider this an 8-weight reel, it would be super light. Granted, I think it's a little bit of a stretch to call it a true 8-weight, but if we're calling it a 6 or 7 weight, it's still pretty light. Overall, the design is fairly minimal and they didn't use too much extra material. And I think if there's one area that RA didn't do the best job in, it's sound. As we take this reel apart, you can see there's one little clicker there, and it just doesn't give you the kind of feedback that you'll get with a Hardy Perfect. It's just very muted, and well, why don't you take a listen? It does have a differentiated incoming and outgoing, which is pretty nice. Last but not least is ergonomics, and while by today's standards, the ergonomics are not fantastic, they are just good. By way back when standards, they're incredible. You've got a handle that's really easy to grab. It's got this little piece of plastic here that gives you a tactile point on the reel. It's also long enough so that you're not gonna be bumping your knuckles up against the spool. And further, we've got a drag knob that you can actually grip, which is pretty nice. It's not the biggest one by today's standards, like I said, but for back then, this is great. On the front, you've also got a quick release for the spool, which is again, really great for a reel that was made so long ago. And while these aren't necessarily ergonomic notes, this reel is an exceptionally interesting design. We've got a full cage reel that has this wire frame here. And so if you were gonna fish with this reel, you could use that for Euro nymphing or trout spay or something like that with ease. And as you can see, the tolerances are really tight. It's just a very meticulously crafted reel. It also has this sort of triangular, almost sail shape to it that just gives it a really pleasing aesthetic. And again, the departure from that traditional Hardy Perfect. One other thing that's very interesting about this particular reel is you can adjust the angle on the reel foot. You've got a screw here, so you could take that off and in theory get a new one if you broke it. But given that RET Hart no longer makes reels, that might be kind of tough, so don't drop it. But by pushing the angle of the reel up, you're actually able to change the balance point on the rod. So we're taking a reel that's already pretty light and moving that further up and thereby making the rod feel even lighter. So if you were to make this reel today, this would still be a pretty great feature, especially for those Euro nymphers out there. You can set up that balance point exactly how you want it, which I think is pretty cool and just an exceptional design feature, given that this reel is now closing in on 30 or 40 years old. And that's the RE2. It is a fantastic vintage fly reel, and if you're a collector of fly reels, you really owe it to yourself to add an RET Hart or 3 or 5 to your collection, because he was really a true innovator. And frankly, I think there are some reels today that could use a little bit of learning from RET Hart. Tell us what you think about this reel and what your favorite vintage fly reel is by leaving us a comment in the box below. And don't forget, if you've got questions about vintage tackle, we've got answers. Shoot us a call at 888-413-5211 or email us 24/7 at support@tridentflyfishing.com. I'm Ben. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.